My man Jeff is here from down under. Jeff Rich, how you doing, man?
How
You
are
doing
you,
okay this
Jamal?
morning?
I'm
I'm
very
doing
good.
okay. Yeah, I'm doing all
I
right.
was um I was thinking of putting on a tie for you, but I've forgotten how to do it. It's
You
been
don't have to
so
do it for
long.
me. Don't have
But
to do it for
I
me.
thought I'd sort of, give you some flowers with the wattle is flowering here in southern Australia at the moment. So there you go. A
Well,
little
I
bit of colour
appreciate
for you.
that. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And just for the audience, Jeff Rich, he's an author, historian, podcaster who's worked 33 years in government, now retired. He currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. Jeff has spent a lifetime studying history and how knowledge of historical currents can help give context to a changing world. You can find Jeff on YouTube at The Burning Archive. It is a damn good show. I know I said this every time you come on, Jeff. I mean it. I have a soft spot for like historical context. And you have a really good way of explaining that stuff and bringing on guests to kind of give further explanations. So damn good shadow, man.
Thank
Um,
you.
and let's see, and you can find I'm also on Substack at jeffrich, that's substack.com. The reason you're here
Hmm.
is you hit me up saying, hey, I've noticed that you've gone through Peter Turnich, I think it's Turnich, his book,
Turchin. As in urchin, turchin. Yep.
Turchin, thank you,
Yep.
his book, End Times. And one of my audience members brought it to my attention. I had never heard of the author. And I consumed that book in 2 days flat. I mean, like literally just consumed that book because the book makes an argument that I make, even though he makes the argument better because he uses historical context, he uses historical examples, he breaks it down into the details. But long story short, I can't see an out. It seems like in the US, we have political capture and political capture in a way that is not responsive to public sentiment. Now, he describes this as having an excess of elites. And
Mhm.
because you have the excess of elites, there's a wealth pump that takes place where those elites are in positions of authority. As they're in positions of authority, they make rules and regulations that are in their best interests, not in the interests of the public. And you extract wealth, basically immiseration of the working class and the poor. And because they're elites, they don't care. They have an ideology that informs their point of view of this is right, this is good, this is okay, we're worthy, et cetera, et cetera. The world moves on. And they don't respond to the fact that, hey, you're destroying the working class and the poor. B, the working class and the poor are going to get very upset because they're human beings. They're going to
Mhm.
notice that the system is unfair, regardless of your propaganda. And C, they're going to be wannabe elites who want to get
Yeah.
into those positions where
Counter
there are no,
elites. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
We want to be elites. Yeah.
wannabe elites. And they can't break into those positions
Mm.
and make the point of saying those are some of the most dangerous people in the society because those people will harness the
Mm.
anger and the resentment of the working class and the poor to revolt.
Mm.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Give me your take on this. I mean, you're a doctor,
Yeah. Yep.
historian. I
Yep.
know you don't like
Uh,
to call doctor, but Dr. Jeff Rich.
Yeah,
Damn it,
Dr.
I'm going to
Jeff
own
Rich.
it.
Yeah,
Your
no,
take on
he's
this?
a really interesting writer. I've actually been following him for quite a few years. I've been aware of him for quite a few years. And he's quite an interesting character. He's kind of Russian American. He
Yeah.
actually trained initially as an entomologist, so like an insect scientist, and sort of moved into history and has this very quantitative approach to history
Hmm.
and uses that. He's developed all these data sets across different societies to say, well, these are the basic social mechanics that are involved in historical situations. And his basic argument is that, there's a whole stream of historical argument that's like this, that history goes in cycles, rise and fall of empires, or in his case, periods of political integration where elites cohesively, shape the society in a way that's less exploitative, and then disintegration and collapse. So when you get the elite overproduction, too many elites,
That's the
they
word.
start squabbling. Yep.
Elite
Yeah.
overproduction. I was
Yeah.
looking for the word. I couldn't think of the word. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, so you get this sort of squabbling that goes on, and they, because there's too many of them, and in the end, if power is a pyramid, there's always only one spot at the top. Doesn't matter how many people have got a PhD or, a legal certificate or whatever it is. Only one person can be number one. So, and you get that across, a range of different positions. So, the more elites there are, with a fixed number of positions of, real status and authority, the more tension and conflict there is. And in the disintegration phase, that sort of breaks down. And his argument is that, that's the situation the United States is in
Yes.
at the moment, and that it's been in that situation before, first being like in the 1850s during the US Civil War,
Yep.
and the second time being in the 1920s. And it's now sort of in a similar sort of position. So it's quite an interesting argument. And he's got a lot of compelling evidence to it. And it actually echoes a lot of, classic arguments that have been made over time. Like,
Hmm.
you could say it's a little bit of a reworking of, hopefully we won't get, taken off YouTube for quoting Marx, but, the
Yeah,
history of
not
all
the rules are
previous
changed.
societies, the
Yeah.
history of class struggle, and Peter Turchin is history of all previous societies is the, struggle between elites and counter elites, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's a similar kind of thing. And similarly, his argument about the wealth pump is a variation of the immiseration of the proletariat from Marx.
Hmm.
So, but I guess we know that those two arguments, they certainly still have their proponents. But, I guess the balance of opinion over time would probably be that, they don't really explain everything in history. So one has
You
to
know?
question whether
Oh,
whether whether
let's talk
Peter
about them.
Turchin's theory is. But
They don't. I would agree they do. Maybe it
yeah,
depends on what you mean by everything.
yeah, yeah,
But from the
yeah.
standpoint of, I mean, he even made the point, pointing out like during the 30s where FDR
Mm,
gets in, and the
mm.
reason that you didn't have this kind of calamity and collapse. I've had Richard Wolff on the show.
Yep.
Richard Wolff pointed out that you had communists, you had socialists, you had all of these people pushing against the system. You
Mm,
just had a revolution take place in Russia like 10 years prior. That stuff was on people's minds.
mm,
And so the elites were able to get together to come up with a new deal that staved off chaos in the American political system
mm.
that, if they didn't do it, was expected to take place.
Mm.
I think he's right. I mean, even
Look,
like
yeah,
one more thing, he even makes this argument about like societies that have poly, what is it called? Poly, when you marry multiple people, it'll come to you in a moment. Poly,
polyamory or polygamy, polygamy,
polygamy, thank
polygamy.
you.
Yep.
That those societies fall faster because
Mm,
those elites can marry other people who can produce more kids who are in the elite, which means you get more elites faster, which you get the
mm,
collapse in society.
mm,
I
mm.
mean, I do, taking out famines, taking out stuff like that, it does seem like that argument is true. What else would you add to it that would have that sort of effect on a society that would call it to collapse in that way?
Well, I guess there's different grades, I guess, of collapse, aren't there? So there's rapid disintegration, there's slow crumbling, there's sort of stagnation, all that sort of thing. And this is part of the problem with the sort of cyclical sort of argument,
Yeah.
I guess not all those situations are really identical, but for the purposes of his data set, he's sort of counting them all as identical. So he's sort of saying this is the same kind of political crisis and he's got numerous examples in the book
Mhm.
like he talks about the 18, like the Chartist, which is the sort of political radicals in Britain in the 1840s, sort of
Yeah.
working class based, I guess, pushing for democracy that ultimately sort of fizzles out. In 1848 in Europe, where there's sort of revolutions across Europe in 1848, leading to, one of Marx's more famous essays, if we refer to Marx again, the 18th Brumaire. But and he talks about the Russian reform period in the sort of late 19th century. I think he talks about the FDR type situation as another example of an elite developing this sort of cohesive approach for leadership across the society. So he says it is possible to get out of this situation, and this is what you do with it. But I guess from my perspective, I would say when you sort of start to interrogate a lot of those cases, you think, well, he's picked out a couple of the elements of that situation, but he's sort of neglected this or this or this or this. And all of these, people have studied and argued about the meaning of the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, and the Velvet Revolution, any other revolution. They're super complex events. So to try to reduce them to one single long-term dynamic is sort of questionable. And often, historians go through fashions, I guess, like anyone else.
Yeah.
There was a time in the past where it was very fashionable to argue the sort of the deep, driving undercurrents of, what's happening with bread prices or elite overproduction or whatever was the fundamental cause of all these kind of major critical events. Whereas at the moment, generally, there's a lot more focus on contingency, chance events, individual agency, the, chaotic combination of events. So on the whole, I would probably say, I think Turchin's account in sort of doing an incredible intellectual, and I really admire it, and it's really quite insightful in many ways.
Yeah.
Sort of, all this sort of across thousands of years of time and many different societies, creating a sort of framework to make sense of it all. It does sort of make sense of a lot of it, but you have to realize that the way in which he's made sense of it is he's sort of stripped out, all
It's
sorts of
essentials.
things. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's a bit like a sort of neoclassical economics model. Like, they say this is how the economy works. Look, I know it's too complex to sort of explain, so we'll just assume that actually people operate in a way that we know that they don't operate.
But they do operate that way. Like, for example, if we were playing chess and I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
teaching you how to play, I would
yeah,
say the knight is worth 3, the bishop is worth 3, the rook is worth
yeah,
5, the queen is worth 9. And you
yeah,
tell kids that from the very
yeah,
beginning.
yeah,
It's not true. Like,
yeah,
that's not true. But in practice, it
yeah,
is. Like, meaning those
mm,
pieces have no value short of use value that you
yeah, yeah,
give to them in a board. In fact, as you get
yeah,
stronger as a player, you have to forget that. You have to like
yeah,
scrub that out of your
yeah,
mind because
yeah,
those pieces don't have value. But in practice, it is true. Meaning you could strip out, let's say, elements that may add
mm,
to something for an overarching element that seems to be one of the key factors that's determinative.
mm,
And in this case, I think he is right. Like, if you
mm,
think of all of those situations that he brought up,
mm,
it is true that you get a thing of elites. It is
mm,
true that those
mm,
elites make laws, policy, produce papers, create media spaces that tell them how
mm,
awesome they are and why your
mm,
society is the way your society is.
mm,
It is true that it creates an immiseration of the working class, meaning
mm,
these things are mechanics. Like, I think society
yeah,
is mechanical.
mm,
And so, from
mm,
my point of view as a software engineer for 10 years, it
mm,
makes sense.
yeah,
And then it's like, okay, well, what is the working class going to do in that situation? Are they just going to sit there and get worse off as their situation gets worse off. Well, no, they're going to protest. They're going to riot. You're going to have more
mm,
crime. You're going to
mm,
have, more robberies. You're going to have more destitution. You're going to get
mm,
places looking like California, where people are, just doing drugs on the street and taking dumps on the street. That's going to
mm,
be your society. And you're going to
mm,
get elites who are in Congress right now saying, hey, I know we don't have a great healthcare system in America, but let's pull nearly $1 trillion out of the healthcare system to give it to the rich. Or, hey, I know we have starving people in the States, but let's pull out
mm.
billions of dollars from SNAP benefits that would feed hungry children and let's give it to the rich. That's what they're doing. So, like, when I
I,
see that, I'm like, okay,
yeah,
nobody in their right mind thinks that's great, except
yeah,
for elites who want
yeah,
to
yeah,
put more money in their pockets.
yeah, yeah.
That seems to be, meaning that argument seems to be rational. Not to mention, you get Occupy Wall Street, you get
Mm,
these protests over Black Lives Matter, you get protests over COVID. And it's like, okay, well, these things might have been related to that, but a lot of those people who are out there were just pissed
mm,
off at their
mm.
government and the way that their government operated. Like, to
Yeah.
me, it makes sense. But
Yep,
tell me if I'm
absolutely.
wrong in this. Is there another factor?
No, I think it does. I mean, as I say, I think it does explain a lot. But I guess the question is, where does it not explain things? So for the elite overproduction thing, right, is interesting, isn't it? So okay, so in what sense? It's a bit like people saying, China's got overcapacity in its economy. It's sort of like,
Right.
by what standard or by what measure do you say you've overproduced elites? Now, and one reason you have that is because of the development of mass higher education in all, well, really
Yes.
all societies really now,
Yes.
pretty much, not just Western societies, but all societies. Uh, and that's a fundamental transformation that we've there's actually never been. I mean, this is an argument that I'd contrast with, say, what Emmanuel Todd says in his various sort of big sociological histories,
Right.
that our society has now got a whole series of social characteristics that society simply didn't have, even 100 years ago, and in very fundamental ways. Like he says, we're older, as
Hmm.
in longevity has increased enormously, and also the proportions of older people, children, has changed proportionally. So the actual day-to-day lived reality of getting around in society has fundamentally changed. We're richer, however many it is, 1 billion people out of poverty in China, 400 million
Right.
people out of poverty in India, etc. And although there's enormous wealth inequality, there's also enormous, wealth and abundance and prosperity, etc. in many societies. We're also the most educated societies that have ever existed. So, how exactly do you compare the competition, if you like, between elites in a society which has, I don't know, a third to a half of young people participating in, higher education universities,
Right.
compared to what it was in 1900, which was, I don't know, like 2 to 3%. So it's like, it's an order of magnitude difference. And all that goes with different social attitudes, different characteristics. So I feel there's a dynamism to the way in which societies and cultures change over time,
Mhm.
which isn't really captured in Peter Turchin's analysis, because he's saying, he's sort of looking at these sort of fixed characteristics of elites and their competition, and crisis not crisis sort of thing over time. So he
Yeah.
doesn't actually capture the way in which all those things of basic social experiences of how long do you live, how well educated are you, what does that make you feel about, how what you do, whether you deserve what you've done in life. And there has been some, big change. A lot of people describe some of the political polarization these days
Mhm.
as being driven as much by educational stratification these days as I guess traditional class occupational stratification. And that's an argument that's been made by like Thomas Piketty and lots of
Yep.
other people, Emmanuel Todd as well. So those kind of factors I think get missed out of Turchin's analysis because he's sort of looking at this sort of he's sort of
Class-based argument.
looking at it like insects if you like across time.
But I think we are insects. Like I
Yeah,
think this stuff is mechanical.
yeah,
I never thought this stuff was mechanical for a long time. In my head, it will go until it can't go anymore, and then something else will come about. And just to be
yeah,
clear, it's kind of like immigration, right? Like if I'm Denmark, okay,
mm-hmm,
how many people can I immigrate into my country before we start feeling the negative effects from immigration? Okay, there may be a percentage, and then at a certain point, you're going to go over that percentage, which is going to cause problems in your country. Whereas America, being a bigger
but
country, can take
you
more.
see, that's an interesting example, though, isn't it? Because because different societies respond through the nature of the culture, the nature of the institutions, the nature of the sort of social beliefs, I guess, to those stresses in very different ways. So, like, coming from Australia, the I think the proportion of people born overseas is somewhere between I can't remember the exact number, but it's about a quarter to a third, and the
Okay.
proportion of people who are from one of whose parents were either born overseas or one of whose parents were born overseas is more than half.
Mhm.
So, very high rates of immigration, very high rates of Chinese immigration, very high rates of Indian immigration as well. So, multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural sort of immigration. And
Mhm.
Australia is actually, it of course has its issues, but on the whole, it's adapted to that quite well.
Right.
And the rates are double or more than double what's happening in most European countries. But European countries haven't adapted so well, and that's partly because of the political culture. I think it's partly because of the sort of blood and soil traditions of ethnic nationalism in Europe, which are quite
Right.
strong. And you know,
But I
uh,
think you're making my point.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's like, yeah, Europe can tolerate a certain amount before they freak out. And I would wager
yeah.
to you, Australia, there would be an amount where Australia would be like, okay, this is over. Too much.
Well, you see, I mean, there was a famous historian in Australia, Geoffrey Blainey. He's still alive, actually. He taught me, but he was involved in an enormous controversy in the 1980s, where he was basically making that argument about Asian migration in the
Mhm.
1980s. And since, like he said, well, it's getting to the point where we can't cope with it, and it will sort of test the boundaries of things. But immigration since then has increased enormously.
Yeah.
It's much more those proportions have shifted. The balance of India and China, two largest Asian countries in the world, the balance of Asian versus European British migration has changed very further in the way of Asia, and yet we haven't
No
really
pushback.
reached that point.
Right.
And there was a point in the 90s where there was a kind of a sort of a nationalist sort of kind of a a nationalist sort of politician who called Pauline Hanson, who was who was sort of playing, I guess, the race card on immigration, and and making those kind of arguments, which are, I guess, quite common in Europe these days.
Right.
And the across the political spectrum, she was pretty much frozen out. So the way in which the society, the political elites, etc., responded to, I guess, if you could call it like a distress signal within the social system, actually sort of calmed it down without it becoming crisis. Now, maybe that's also an example of, because I mean, what Turchin also argues is, it is possible for societies to sort of navigate their way through
Right.
these crises
Like they're responsible.
successfully as well as
Yeah.
unsuccessfully, and fundamentally the success stories are the ones that develop a bit of a cohesive ethos, both across elites or across elites and counter elites, but also between elites and the people, I guess. Which,
And just
interestingly, is actually, I mean, I've read a few of his books, and so
mhm.
in his more academic books, he explicitly links that to an argument made by Ibn Khaldun, who was a Islamic scholar from, I think, like about 1400 or so, who wrote this sort of history of the world, that basically argued that there was this quality of group ethos or group spiritedness called asabiya, and I apologise if I pronounce it poorly, but
You
so
nailed it.
and in a way, what Turchin is arguing, and so there's absolute plausibility to this. I mean, because people have been arguing this sort of case for centuries,
Yeah.
that faced with the tensions within society, elites can kind of choose to, hang together or hang separately, I guess. And
Right.
I guess what we're observing at the moment is the elites are very much hanging separately rather than hanging together.
Yes. And well, I think they are hanging together. I think they are working in their best interests.
Well, the elites are hanging together, but not amongst themselves, or at least not their counter
Wait,
elites,
explain that
but
one.
not with the people. So
Yes. That's what I
yeah,
mean.
yeah, that's
And
right.
just to be clear, from the standpoint of what's that number is going to be different for each society. Like if you have a society that's expanding, for example, so let's say in the 1960s and 70s, okay, the US is the strongest thing going, jobs are growing, or the number of jobs that are growing, the amount of wealth is increasing. And so you have a situation where people who are in the middle class are also making more money. People in the rich are also making more money. So your society expands in a way that can accommodate more of those elites. So there's no friction in that case. It's everybody. What is a all boats are being lifted simultaneously. But then what happens though when that is no longer true? That's the limit. That
Yeah,
was the point I was trying to make with immigration. Whatever the country, they may have different limits on that or different amounts that they can tolerate. But at a certain point, there's a response. I mean, Europe responded heavily from the number of Syrians that ended up coming into Europe. Look at the
yeah,
backlash that's taking place in the United States. Okay,
yeah,
let's say it's not immigration, but let's say it's elites who the pie is not expanding. They are just taking more of the money, meaning it's not like the wealth of the lower classes are increasing. There was a chart on here. I had what is his name? What is his name? Warwick on first earlier in the week, and he was
yeah. That's
pointing
right.
out.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, he was pointing out. He was like, the money hasn't moved. Like the wealth from the standpoint of the lower classes or the middle classes is just keeping up with expenses. And if you're looking at, let's say, from the 1970s to now, there hasn't been this increase um, in the wages that these people were getting. Nobody could imagine paying that much money for a hospital visit, or that much money for a school, or that much money for a cell phone. Like, so even if you say, okay, well, the money in the 70s versus now are equal, well, those expenses weren't part of it. What you get is the rich getting fantastically richer, with the poor just not keeping up. He's right. Like I find that like
Yeah, no, absolutely.
it is a fulfilling
That's right.
argument to me. And maybe I'm
But
wrong because I'm blinded by
I
where
guess
I am.
no, look, it's absolutely true, and like Thomas Piketty's sort of made this case around wealth inequality and whatnot as
Mhm.
well, but there is big variation between
Countries.
different countries and political systems, like my views about the quality of the sort of social state within America. It's uniquely bad
Oligarchical.
and uniquely incompetent, and there's something there about how exactly did the political culture and political institutions in America fail to do things that, like develop a universal health system, develop a properly functioning social services system,
Yeah.
social welfare system. So there are particular characteristics, but the general trends are certainly there. But I think the other facet of the United States is that, and I think this partly soaks up a lot of the overproduced elites. Is America's got this global empire, and there's the Rockefeller, there's all the foundations and all the think tanks and all the media spots and all the whatever those kind of institutions. And a lot of these overproduced elites end up sort of, I think that soaks up a lot of America's overproduced elites to the disadvantage of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
But there's still, I guess, in a global sense, that imperial elite, if we want to call it that, is certainly sucking the wealth out of other countries. But maybe not for too much longer. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, that's right. Jeff, man, thank you for this. I've been looking forward to having a conversation about this book.
Yeah.
Because it's such a good book.
That's a
And
great
look,
book, and his other books are really worth checking out as well.
I'm going to check those out too. Like I said, I inhaled this book. Jeff
Can I
Rich,
just mention one quick thing, Jamal? I
please.
don't want to hold your next guest up, but we've talked about the whole Ukraine situation a little bit on the show. But
Yeah.
I did see today there's a very prominent Ukrainian journalist called Diana Panchenko, who a week or two ago did this extraordinary video on YouTube, saying Ukrainians are not slaves. That was highly critical of the Ukraine government and the corruption and all that sort of stuff. Today, and she won Journalist of the Year in Ukraine.
Did she?
Very prominent woman, and she has like 2 million subscribers on YouTube. YouTube closed her channel today.
Did they?
Yeah. So
It's bias.
it's behind YouTube, who knows, has influenced that? Because why would YouTube close a channel that has 2 million subscribers?
Because they have a bias towards the U.S. and U.S. policy.
Yeah.
It's just that. It's a U.S. client. Like the media organizations of the U.S. are not independent.
Yeah.
That
But
sucks.
it's obviously there's been there was, I think, 10,000 other channels that were closed just recently. I don't want to get you into trouble, but it's quite a concern, I guess, and it's an interesting action because Diana Pachenko has been quite vocal about the sort of issues that have been raised in the corruption in the recent protests in Ukraine as well. But we can maybe talk about it, see how all that develops another day.
That sucks. I got to be honest with you. I've looked at this as a concern for years. So,
I know.
Jeff, thank you for this, man. And I'm glad you mentioned her because that's a big deal. It's outrageous. Jeff Rich. Jeff Rich is an author, historian, podcaster who worked for 33 years in government, now retired. He currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. Jeff has spent a lifetime of studying history and how knowledge of historical currents can help give context to changing political winds. You can find Jeff on his YouTube channel, The Burning Archive. Again, a fantastic channel. Check him out. And you can find him on Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. Jeff, man, thank you for this.
Thanks, Jamal.